The air was thick with tension. Captain Varric Kor, leader of the feared Iron Fang mercenaries, leaned forward in his seat, his cybernetic eyes scanning the holographic display. Across from him, the client, a nervous-looking official from the Zahari Trade Confederation, wiped sweat from his scaled brow. "You want us to hunt humans?" Varric asked, his voice low, dangerous. The Zahari official flinched. "Not just humans, Deathworlders." A murmur of unease rippled through Varric's lieutenants. Even hardened mercenaries hesitated at that word. Deathworlders. Everyone in the galactic underworld knew what that meant. Humans weren't just dangerous. They were something else entirely. But credits were credits. And this job came with a fortune. "Go on," Varric said. The Zahari official exhaled shakily. "We hired a special operations team, a unit of your kind, to capture a human spec ops squad that had infiltrated one of our research facilities. We assumed they were a rogue element." "Assumed?" Varric narrowed his eyes. The Zahari official swallowed. "They weren't rogue. They were something else. They moved like ghosts. Our best security forces didn't even see them coming. Entire teams went dark in minutes. We lost all contact with the facility." Varric glanced at his lieutenants. "And your mercenaries?" Pause. The Zahari looked away. "They're all dead." A heavy silence settled over the room. Varric felt a cold sensation creep down his spine. This wasn't a mission. This was a suicide run. And yet, he had a reputation to maintain. "Send us everything you have," he said. "We'll handle it." But in his gut, he knew he had just made a mistake. The hunt begins. The Iron Fang mercenaries were not amateurs. Their reputation had been built on 100 successful contracts, from planetary raids to political assassinations. And now they were hunting Deathworlder special forces. Standard tactics wouldn't work. So Varric planned for war. Scout drones deployed first, mapping the ruined research facility. Jammer fields activated, cutting off any human communications. Specialized thermal sensors scanned for movement, filtering out the chaotic readings that Deathworlders always seemed to manipulate. The strategy was simple: overwhelm, locate, go. But as they descended into the ruined facility, something felt wrong. The air was too still. The corridors too empty. It was as if the humans were waiting. And then it happened. The first kill. The first scream barely lasted a second. Varric spun around, his rifle raised, only to see Lieutenant Threx's body crumpling to the floor. No gunfire. No explosion. Just a knife embedded in his throat. "Contact!" Varric roared. The mercenaries opened fire, but there was nothing to shoot at. The corridors were empty. Varric's cybernetic eye flickered, scanning for movement. Nothing. The human had been there, and then vanished. One of his mercenaries cursed. "What the hell are we fighting?" Varric's jaw clenched. This wasn't a fight. This was an ambush. And the hunters had just become the hunted. The terror spreads. The team moved fast, sweeping through the corridors in a tight formation. Every corner felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. And it was. A second mercenary vanished into the dark, pulled screaming into a vent before anyone could react. There in the walls. Panic set in. Seasoned killers were breaking. "Fall back." Varric growled, trying to regain control. And then the voices started. From the facility's intercom system. Distorted. Inhuman. Mocking. "Running already?" Varric froze. The humans were playing with them. And for the first time in his life he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The final realization. Varric's forces had started as 30. Now they were 12. The humans never attacked head-on. They struck from shadows. They used the environment against them. They turned the entire battlefield into a psychological weapon. This wasn't war. This was hunting. And the Iron Fang mercenaries? They weren't the predators. They were prey. Varric took a slow breath. He had two choices. Continue the mission. Or run. His pride screamed at him to stay. But his instincts? They told him to flee. And instincts kept you alive. "All units," he whispered, "we're leaving." And that was when the lights went out. Darkness. For a mercenary it was a familiar enemy. Night raids, hidden bunkers, deep space extractions. All required mastery over the dark. But this was different. The facility's emergency lights had been severed. The bioluminescent wall panels, standard in Zahari-built stations, had been shattered, their glow extinguished. For the first time in his career, Captain Varric Kor felt blind. And he knew this was deliberate. The humans had done this on purpose. The whispering ghost. Varric crouched low, his rifle tight against his shoulder, cybernetic eye switching to thermal vision. It was useless. Somehow the humans had masked their heat signatures. Night vision on, he ordered through gritted teeth. His mercenaries followed, only to curse in horror. The goggles showed movement but nothing tangible. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, shifting, phasing in and out like phantoms. Then a voice. Not a shout. Not a battle cry. A whisper. Right behind him. You're not the hunters anymore. Varric spun, firing instinctively. Nothing. Just the emptiness of the facility. And then, screaming. The first massacre. 3 of his men dropped instantly. Varric barely saw it happen. The human soldiers didn't charge or engage like normal fighters. They dragged their victims into the dark. The mercenaries opened fire blindly, weapons blazing, filling the corridors with plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. No one hit anything. And the screaming continued. Fall back. Varric roared. The remaining mercenaries scrambled backward, forming a defensive perimeter. Their guns whirred and reloaded. The humans did not pursue. They didn't need to. They were already inside the perimeter. The psychological war. Something moved behind them. Varric turned just in time to see a shadow dart past the doorway. Contact rear. Someone shouted. The team spun, weapons raised, but there was nothing. Then the lights flickered for half a second. And in that half-second Varric saw them. 5 human operators, crouched along the walls and ceiling, motionless like predators waiting for the kill. Then the lights died again. They're right here. Gunfire erupted. The walls shook from the sheer amount of desperate, blind shooting. But when the lights flickered back on, there were no bodies. Only 3 more missing mercenaries. And something etched into the steel wall in blood. Too slow. Varric's heart pounded. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter. Escape plan? Abandon the contract. Varric's mind raced. They had to get out. Fallback route, he barked. One of his officers, Lieutenant Rexa, pulled up a holographic map of the facility. We can reach the lower hangar in 5 minutes if we move fast. Varric clenched his jaw. Do it. No. They moved as a unit, covering all angles, watching every shadow. No one spoke. They were trapped in a nightmare where the enemy controlled sight, sound, and fear itself. And then, a loud, metallic clang echoed through the halls. A sound no mercenary ever wanted to hear. Doors locking. The Deathworlder tactics. No escape. Varric's stomach dropped. They're sealing us in, Rexa hissed. Varric turned sharply to the tech officer. Override it. The officer worked fast, fingers flying across his datapad, but then he stopped. Sir, he whispered. They're already in the system. Varric's hands tightened into fists. They locked us in before we even planned to retreat. The humans had predicted them. They hadn't just ambushed them. They had led them here. Like cattle to a slaughterhouse. And now the doors had sealed. The last stand. With no other choice, Varric did what he did best. He prepared for war. Breach formation. Shields up. We fight to the last. His mercenaries took defensive positions, plasma barriers snapping to life. If the humans wanted them, they'd have to take them in a full frontal fight. Silence. And then, a hiss. Guess. Thick, colorless choking. Varric cursed violently. Masks on. The mercenaries snapped on their respirators, but it didn't matter. The gas wasn't lethal. It was worse. It was a neurodisruptor, a weapon used to disorient, confuse, and induce hallucinations. The first mercenary screamed, dropping his weapon. They're in my head. Then another dropped. And another. Varric gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain calm. This was textbook Deathworlder tactics. They weren't killing for fun. They were breaking their minds first. Terror was a weapon. And humanity had mastered it. The final kill. Through the swirling mist, Varric saw movement. The humans had stepped out of the darkness. They didn't rush. They didn't yell. They simply walked forward, weapons raised and precise. Varric lifted his rifle, too late. A shock baton slammed into his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Through blurred vision he saw his men falling one by one. They weren't even fighting back anymore. They had lost before the battle even started. The whispered warning. As Varric's vision faded, a figure crouched beside him. A human soldier. Their face was hidden behind a dark visor, their expression unreadable. But their voice? Cold. Precise. Deadly. You were warned. Varric tried to speak, but the world went black. Conclusion. Why alien mercenaries fear Deathworlder special forces. When Varric woke up, he was alone. The facility was silent. No bodies. No blood. No sign of the humans. His mercenaries? Gone. Their weapons? Gone. The only thing left was a message etched into his armor. You were prey the moment you took the job. The Iron Fang mercenaries were never heard from again. And across the galaxy, no mercenary company dared accept a contract against Deathworlders Special Forces ever again. Because now they knew the truth. You don't hunt humans. Humans hunt you. Varric woke to silence. Not the comforting silence of deep space, nor the eerie quiet of an empty battlefield. This was the silence of absence. He lay on the cold metal floor of the Zahari research facility, his armor scratched and scuffed but intact. His rifle was gone. His communicator was gone. His entire squad was gone. But there was no blood. No bodies. It was as if the Iron Fang mercenaries had never existed. A shiver ran through him. Deathworlders didn't just kill. They erased. And the message carved into his armor? You were prey the moment you took the job. It wasn't just a warning. It was a fact. The aftermath of failure. Varric forced himself upright, every muscle aching. He wasn't injured, at least not in any way that mattered. His cybernetic eye flickered back online, running diagnostic sweeps. No signs of movement. No heat signatures. No remaining enemy presence. The humans were gone. But that was the problem. Why had they left him alive? The long walk. With no other option, Varric began the long walk back to his ship. Every step through the ruined corridors of the research facility felt wrong. His mercenaries had been annihilated, yet there were no signs of a battle. No bodies. No discarded weapons. Only the faint, telltale marks of forced extractions. They had been taken alive. A chill ran through him. Humans didn't take prisoners. At least not unless they had a reason. And if they had a reason, that meant. Varric clenched his jaw. This wasn't over. The warning that came too late. By the time he reached the docking bay, his ship, the Ravager's Claw, had already powered up. That alone put him on edge. His crew should have been waiting at the landing ramp. His pilots should have been prepping for emergency departure. Instead, the ramp was down, the lights inside flickering ominously. Varric approached slowly, hand reaching for the sidearm that wasn't there. His instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. And then, a voice from inside. Weak, strained, terrified. Captain, run. A fate worse than death. Varric's blood turned to ice. That voice, Rexa. His second in command. One of the most ruthless, cold-blooded killers in the sector. And he sounded like a frightened child. Varric stepped inside cautiously, his boots echoing through the empty corridor. Rexa, he called out. Report. Silence. Then, a scraping sound. Metal on metal. Something dragged itself toward him. Varric lifted his cybernetic eye scanner, but the image it returned made no sense. His brain refused to process it. Then Rexa emerged from the shadows. And Varric staggered back. It was him. But not him. His armor was gone, replaced with tight, reinforced restraints around his limbs and torso. His body was shaking, twitching unnaturally. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were wide, wild, hollow. Rexa. Varric whispered. His second in command flinched at the sound of his own name. Then he spoke. They let me go, he rasped, voice raw. They let me go so I could tell you. Varric took a step forward. Tell me what? Rexa shuddered. Then he said words that no mercenary should ever say. We never should have hunted them. The cost of hunting Deathworlders. Varric didn't move. Where are the others? He asked. Rexa trembled. Gone. Taken. Taken where? Rexa laughed, a broken hollow sound. They didn't take us to kill us. They didn't take us to interrogate us. His breath hitched. They took us to show us. Varric's gut twisted. Show you what? Rex's head snapped up. His voice dropped to a whisper. The kind of war they fight. And then Varric understood. The real war. This had never been just about the Zahari research facility. The contract had never been about eliminating rogue human operatives. The Zahari had lied. And the Deathworlders had known from the start. Varric felt his breathing slow. This wasn't a battle. It was a test. The humans hadn't fought to survive. They had fought to teach a lesson. And Varric had been left alive to deliver it. The message that broke him. Rexa shuddered. Then he spoke again. They told me to tell you this. Varric remained silent. Rexa took a shaky breath. You were never the real threat. Varric's hands curled into fists. What does that mean? Rex's lips trembled. It means there's something worse coming. Varric felt the weight of the words settle over him. The humans weren't just preparing for war. They were preparing for something bigger. Something even they feared. And they had let him live to warn the galaxy. The choice. Varric exhaled slowly. He had two choices. Walk away. Pretend this mission had never happened. Or deliver the warning. But if he did, it meant admitting that everything the galaxy thought it knew about war was wrong. And that humanity was not the apex predator. Not yet. Because something worse was coming. And even Deathworlders feared it. The next move. Varric turned to Rexa. Where are they? He asked quietly. Rexa hesitated. The humans. Varric shook his head. The thing they're afraid of. Rexa swallowed hard. Then he said a name. And Varric felt his blood run cold. The name Rexa had whispered echoed in Varric's mind like a death sentence. The Revenants. Varric had heard the name before. A myth, a ghost story told in hushed tones among mercenaries and warlords. A force so deadly, so advanced, that even the most brutal empires dared not speak of them aloud. The Revenants were not human. But humanity feared them. And that terrified Varric more than anything. The truth behind the shadows. Varric locked himself in his ship's war room, pulling every record, every fragment of information on the Revenants. There was almost nothing. No official reports. No classified military intelligence. No confirmed encounters. Only whispers. A rogue faction of Deathworlder special forces. A splinter group that had broken away. A force of ghosts, created for a war that never should have existed. And then he found it. A fragmented distress signal intercepted on a long-dead channel. The voice was human. If you receive this, it's already too late. Varric felt his blood turn to ice. And then the transmission ended. With screaming. The hidden enemy. Rexa sat hunched in the crew's med bay, staring blankly at the wall. Varric approached carefully. Tell me everything. Rexa exhaled shakily. The humans we fought, they weren't just defending themselves. Varric frowned. We already knew that. No, Rexa murmured. You don't understand. They were practicing. Varric narrowed his eyes. Practicing for what? Rexa finally turned, his hollow gaze meeting Varric's. For when the Revenants come for them. Varric's heart pounded. The humans weren't the apex predators. They were preparing for something worse. The last survivor. There was one place left to look for answers. A human prisoner. Varric had captured him 2 cycles ago, back when he still thought this was a simple mercenary job. The man, Sergeant Daniel Cross, hadn't spoken a word. Until now. Varric entered the holding cell. Cross sat against the cold metal wall, wrists bound, face bruised but eyes calm. Tell me about the Revenants, Varric said. Cross smirked. You don't want to know. Varric slammed his fist into the wall beside Cross's head. I wasn't asking. Cross studied him for a long moment. Then at last he spoke. The Revenants aren't just soldiers. His voice was low, steady. They were made to fight a war that no one else could win. Varric's jaw tightened. Against who? Cross hesitated. Then he whispered, not who. What? The war that shouldn't exist. The Revenants were humanity's answer to an unknown threat. A threat no one else had seen. A war that had already begun in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They aren't hunting enemies, Cross said quietly. They're hunting something that shouldn't be real. Varric stared at him. And what is that? Cross leaned in. The things that eat Deathworlders. Varric felt his stomach drop. The apex predators of the galaxy had predators of their own. The mission that never happened. Varric knew the truth now. The Revenants were real. The war was real. And if the Revenants were already fighting, it meant the galaxy was one step away from complete extinction. No one else knew. No one else was prepared. Only the humans. And they weren't sharing the secret. The final warning. Varric released Cross from his restraints. The human rubbed his wrists, watching him cautiously. You're letting me go? Varric nodded. You're not my enemy. Cross studied him. Then who is? Varric exhaled slowly. The things that hunt your Revenants. Cross's eyes darkened. Then you're already too late. And at that moment, the lights flickered. The ship's alarm screamed. And the shadows moved. The last stand begins. Varric didn't even have time to shout before the first scream tore through the ship. Something was here. Not human. Not Carnath. Something else. And suddenly Varric understood. The Revenants weren't hunters. They were the last line of defense. And now, the war had come for him. The end. Rocket subscribe for more HFY stories, galactic warfare, and humanity's rise to power. Rocket.